Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Timothy Lee, and I'm a research analyst at Red Cloud Securities. I'm delighted to host a Red Cloud webinar on silver and gold exploration and development today. We will hear from Andrew Williams, CEO, and also on the line is Carolina Ordoñez, VP Corporate Affairs of New Pacific Metals Corp. During today's webinar, they will provide an overview and outlook, and then we will take questions. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can. Before we kick things off, first we need to discuss some fine print during this New Pacific webinar. Forward-looking statements may be made. I would direct listeners to the company's forward-looking statements disclosure, and that's outlined on pages 2 and 3 of the company's corporate presentation. And that can be found on the company's website, newpacificmetals.com. For Red Cloud Securities, Inc., I would highlight that this webinar is for information purposes only. It should not be considered a solicitation or a recommendation to buy or sell securities. We note that this call does not consider the particular situation or needs of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigation and seek their own professional advice before investing. Please see our most recent research located on the Red Cloud website for specific disclosures pertaining to New Pacific Metals. So we have New Pacific presenting today. The company is focused on silver and gold exploration in Bolivia, where it has a pipeline of projects from its flagship silver sand project to its earlier stage exploration targets. With that said, I now turn it over to Andrew and Carolina to update our audience on the company.
Well, thank you, Timothy, and thanks to everyone who's on the line joining us today. Very pleased to provide you with an overview of our company, New Pacific Metals, with an aptly titled presentation, Riding the Silver Wave in the Land of Elephants. We're seeing a nice perking up of precious metals prices recently, silver prices as well, very strong, and we are operating exclusively in Bolivia, which, as I'll get to throughout the presentation, a prolific mining jurisdiction with phenomenal geology. So, New Pacific Metals, our journey into Bolivia began in 2017 with an exploration concept known as the Silver Sand Project. It was this idea that brought us as a first mover back into Bolivia, and that project has since become one of the best, if not the best, primary silver discoveries that's been made anywhere in the world in this past decade. And in January of this year, we released our preliminary economic assessment study, highlighting a project that can produce 171 million ounces of silver production over a 14-year life at $10 an ounce all-in sustaining cost, yielding an after-tax net present value of $726 million and a 39% after-tax rate of return and a sub-2-year payback period on the capital invested. Truly a fantastic project. And if that wasn't a tough enough act to follow, in the middle of 2021, our company acquired the Carangas project, which is in the middle of our slide. And we've drilled Carangas over the last 2 years, and Carangas has now become a second major discovery within our company. Again, a greenfields discovery. And in September of this year, we released our inaugural resource estimate, highlighting total indicated resources of 560 million silver equivalent ounces and an additional 110 million ounces in the inferred category, all within a pit shell with a 1.8 to 1 strip ratio and backed by some favorable preliminary silver and gold metallurgical test work. So Carangas very much on its way to becoming a second major discovery within our company in a short amount of time. And our third project, Silver Strike, on the right side of the page, is the least advanced of our three. We completed last year a scout drilling program, drilled about 3,000 meters, and hit 200-meter runs of near-surface oxidized gold mineralization at roughly 1 gram per ton, and consider Silver Strike to be prospective for both silver sand and Carangas styles of mineralization. So looking at our near-term work plan across our 3 projects at Silver Sand, we're expecting to complete our pre-feasibility study by the first half of next year. So upgrading the PEA study that we released in January of this year into a pre-feasibility study. That work's being done by AMC Mining Consultants. And we're also, in parallel to that, working towards completing our environmental impact assessment study. And last but not least, we're working with the state-owned mining company Commie Ball to obtain the ratification and approval of a signed mining production contract for areas that surround our silver sand tenements. And then at our Carangas project, so we've completed the remainder of our drilling for our resource statement. That completed in April of this year. We drilled 17,000 meters. And then over Q2 and into Q3, we worked on our inaugural resource estimate, which we put out in September of this year. And then for our next steps at Carangas, we're expecting to complete our preliminary economic assessment in the first half of next year. The timing of that will correspond more or less to when we also expect to release our silver sand pre-feasibility study in probably April, May, June, call it Q2 of next year. And then at our Silver Strike project, at the beginning of this year, we made the decision to pause our exploration activities and really focus our efforts on both the Silver Sand and Carangas project. We've got a lot on our plate. We're a small junior company as well. The market environment, as I'm sure a lot of the attendees on this webinar can appreciate, is we just weren't getting the credit for the types of drill holes we were putting out at Silver Strike. So when you combine a bandwidth issue and a weaker market, we hit the pause button, but still consider Silver Strike to be a highly prospective property in our portfolio. And at some point in the future, we'll be excited to get back in and start drilling again, but not this year. So stepping back and looking at Bolivia, how have we been so successful as an exploration company operating in this country over the last 6 years? The first point to emphasize is that the geology in Bolivia is first class. So just 35 kilometers from our flagship Silver Sand project is the 3 billion ounce Cerro Rico silver deposit, which has been continuously operating since 1545. It was the mine that financed the mighty Spanish Empire for centuries. I mean, one of the great mineral discoveries in our world's history. And also, if you look at the map, we're geologically consistent with neighboring Chile, Peru, and Argentina, which are 3 very significant mining countries. Second point to highlight is that Bolivia is a mining country. The mining culture runs deep in its DNA. In 2022, Bolivia was ranked as the 6th largest silver producer globally, and mining makes up 21% of the country's exports. And last but not least, the country's seen very little modern exploration over the last 20 years. So when you combine fantastic geology with a country that's steeped in mining culture and an underexplored area, more or less, you create a very fertile ground for a company like New Pacific to come in. Like I said, 2017, to come in and make a fantastic discovery at Silver Sand and follow it up with what we've found at both Carangas and Silver Strike in a short amount of time. The next slide, Carolina. So zooming into our flagship Silver Sand project, this slide gives you a nice overview of what we've accomplished over the last 6 years. So we've drilled 136,000 meters in 551 holes over the last 5 years, and that drilling forms the basis of our Silver Sand resource estimate, the first of which we released in 2020, and then we released an updated resource estimate in the fall of 2022. And that updated resource estimate is what was used for our preliminary economic assessment that we released in January of this year. This next slide gives you a cartoon overview, a very simplified geological description of the Silver Sand project. So the first point to note is that this is a broad disseminated system. So it's thousands of little veinlets that coalesce in sufficient density to form a bulk mineable deposit. It also comes right to surface, so lends itself extremely well to open pit mining. And the last point I'll note is if you look at the geology, so in blue, that's the rock that hosts the silver sand project. It's a very porous sandstone unit. And in green at the top of the image is an impermeable mudstone horizon. So you can imagine this the silver bearing mineralized fluid flowing up through the porous sandstone unit and encountering that impermeable mudstone horizon and dumping out the best and hot and most rich silver grades against that contact, which is really important when it comes to mine planning, which I'll get to in a subsequent slide, but really means that we get into the best grades of this deposit right away. This is our updated resource estimate in bold, measured and indicated resources of over 200 million ounces of silver, and that's at 116 grams per ton on a gold equivalent basis, about 1.5 grams. So if you think about it intuitively, an open pit at 1.5 grams gold equivalent, it makes good sense why the economics of this project would come out so strong. And the other point I'll highlight from this slide at Silver Sand is that almost all of our resource is in the measured and indicated category. So when we're working towards our pre-feasibility study, of which you need only measured and indicated resources can be converted into reserves, we expect almost all of our mineral endowment to convert to reserves with no additional drilling required. This slide gives you an overview of the highlights from our PEA study that we released in January. So within the open pit, the strip ratio 3.6 to 1, processing 4 million tons of ore per annum. That's about 11,000 tons per day on a calendar day basis at a diluted head grade of 107 grams per ton silver. And then processing that through a conventional crush, grind, tank leach, and recovery by the Merrill-Crowe process, we expect to recover 91% of that contained silver into silver doré bars, which means that we'll get paid 99% of that silver content. And so if you run that at $22.50 silver, 171 million ounces of payable silver over the mine life, that's $3.5 billion of life of mine net revenue, net of the 6% top line royalty, at an all-in sustaining cost of just over $10 an ounce. And so working that through, that's $726 million of after-tax net present value, a 39% post-tax IRR. And what I love about this project's financeability is the 1.9 year after-tax payback period. And so going back to that payback period, tying that into the geological slide, as I mentioned, the best grades pool right up against that contact between the porous sandstone unit and the impermeable mudstone horizon. So when we start mining this deposit, we get into the guts of the system immediately. And so over the 14-year life, we'll produce roughly 12 million ounces per year, but in each of the first 4 years, when we get into that high-grade zone, we're going to produce roughly 16 million ounces of silver per year. And to put that into context for you, silver industry giant Hecla, their silver production this year is 16 to 17 million ounces of silver from their 3 primary silver mines combined. So this one deposit that will produce life of mine silver at roughly $10 an ounce all-in sustaining cost will produce Hecla scale silver production in each of its first 4 years. And again, to put that into further context, you look at Core Mining, First Majestic Mining, their silver production guidance this year is in that 10 to 12 million ounce per year range. So, I mean, this is really industry shaking levels of silver production from just this one low cost asset. Looking at the capital cost, so life of mine, $327 million. Of that, 308 will be upfront. The biggest chunk in there is the processing plant at just under $190 million. There's a modest pre-strip. We got to strip that impermeable mudstone layer away. So it's $47 million. A little bit of infrastructure, $47 million. The 2 biggest pieces in there would be a power line, about a 30-kilometer power line we have to bring to site, as well as building a water reservoir. And the last item I'll flag from this list is the tailings facility, $25 million. That's going to be a dry stack tailings facility. And our final slide on Silver Sand from our PEA gives you an overview of what the layout of this project looks like. So in green is the site access road. It's an existing dirt and gravel road that takes you to site. 30 kilometers to the south of that is a 2-lane paved national highway. And there's also a power line that runs along that highway. So that's the line that we'll tap into and bring to site. You look at the main pit in purple, that contains 97% of the silver. In blue is the water reservoir that we're going to build to capture excess rainwater for use in our process plant. And then in orange is the waste dump and dry stack tailing, the co-disposal. So very nice compact footprint that we outlined in our PEA study that we will continue to refine as part of our pre-feasibility study that we're expected to release in the first half of next year. So moving on to our second project, Carangas. So Carangas is in a different department in Bolivia, or state, if you will, or province if you're from Canada. It's about a 7-hour drive from the capital city of La Paz, and a paved national highway takes you to within 35 kilometers of the project site. And then from that highway, it's 35 more kilometers along a nice flat gravel road. So the access to the Carangas project, much like the Silver Sand project, is fantastic. And then out of Carangas, thinking long-term about building a mine and shipping out concentrate, it's about 270 kilometers from Carangas along a paved highway to a port in Chile. So just under 2 years, it's phenomenal what we've been able to accomplish at Carangas. We've drilled over 80,000 meters of drilling in 189 holes. We acquired the project in April of 2021 by free staking. So our cost base at Carangas was zero. And then we made the discovery in June of 2021 and had enough confidence in what we were onto that in January of last year, we launched a systematic 5 drill rig resource definition drill program that continued right up until the end of April this year. And then with all that data, we worked through the second quarter and much of the third quarter this year to release our inaugural resource estimate at Carangas. Looking at the numbers, it's big. Total indicated mineral resources of 560 million silver equivalent ounces and an additional 110 million ounces in the inferred category. Looking at the 3 zones, so I'll show you a slide next about the geology at Carangas, but we split this resource estimate into 3 distinct domains to faithfully represent the underlying geology at Carangas. And I like to think of Carangas as like a mushroom, where the cap of the mushroom, which comes right to surface, is the upper silver zone, and it has the most amount of tonnage within the overall system, so about 150 million tons of the 250 million tons. And then as you trend deeper, you get into the stem of the mushroom, which is where the zinc zone resides, and then at depth is the gold zone. And we put this slide together to help folks better fit Carangas in within the broader mining industry. Just what kind of a deposit is Carangas? Is it precious? Is it base? And the answer is it's both, but it's still very much a precious metals dominant system. So about 60% of the in situ value at Carangas is within precious metals, and about 40% of that is base metal. And we've thrown together some comparison assets to, again, help folks try and better decide where this fits within the overall context of our industry. And the existing operating mines, Penasquito, San Cristobal, we believe offer good comparables. And then in the undeveloped space, the Cordero project and the Camino Rojo sulfide project also offer some interesting similarities to our Carangas discovery. And then just looking at the geology, so the key point here, if you go back to a resource which was split into 3 distinct zones to faithfully represent the underlying geology, this is the underlying geology. And really the important point to take away is that this zonation is controlled by the temperature and pressure gradient. So silver likes to deposit itself in lower temperature pressure environments, which is what you find closer to surface. And then zinc, and then trending towards gold, likes to deposit itself in higher temperature pressure environments. So it makes good geological sense why we see this zonation at Carangas. And then importantly, we know we've got a lot of metal in the Carangas deposit. But the next big question you got to ask yourself is, can you recover that metal? And thus far, we've received some very encouraging preliminary metallurgical results at Corangus. So in that upper silver zone, which hosts the bulk of the tonnage, of which there's 3 separate domains based on oxidation state, the majority of which is hosted in the fresh domain. Within that fresh domain, we got to a rougher concentrate, 99% of the silver, 98 to 99% of the lead, and 96 to 97% of the zinc. So very encouraging initial test works on that upper silver zone. And then in that deep gold zone, I'll just focus on the samples 4 and 5, where we tested the gold independent of sulfur content. We got 98.5%. So very encouraging preliminary test results. That is something that we are embarking on as we speak. We're getting the samples ready to ship them from Bolivia up to a lab here in Canada, and we've approved a additional metallurgical sampling program. So we'll take some additional samples, mainly from that silver lead zinc zone at the surface, but also another one in the gold, and we'll run some more comprehensive tests so we have some better data for which to use in our preliminary economic assessment that we expect to release in the first half of next year. And this is another slide that we've put together to, again, help folks just understand the value of a discovery like Corangus. And so we've pulled some of our silver development peers, and I'll let you read the numbers at your own leisure. But generally speaking, on average, these types of deposits do have significant value on a per ounce basis, an average, whatever the number you want to use. But when you look at 560 million silver equivalent ounces in the indicated category, another 110 million ounces in the inferred category, based on whatever number you pick, you can see substantial value at Corangus that we created organically by the drill bit. Just this slide gives you a sense that not only have we defined mineralization within our resource estimate, there's more to give. So underneath our pit shell, there's additional gold mineralization similar in size and grade to what we've defined. And we're going to be looking at whether or not we can economically recover that mineralization in a bulk underground mining scenario. So we're looking at that as part of our PEA study. So potentially we can pull some more gold mineralization onto our books. As well, the gold zone on the left, it trends to the north-northeast direction and is very much open at depth. Last but not least on Corangus, so our discovery, which you can see where all the drill holes are peppered, bottom left corner, was blind when we made it initially. It sits underneath 35-40 meters of cover. And so what we did was we ran in January of this year a much broader geophysical survey in the Corangus Basin that flagged another 5 distinct anomalies. And so what this tells us is what we found so far, while it's substantial, might just be scratching the surface in a much larger district at Corangus. And then lastly, our Silver Strike project, I'll just touch on a few key points to give you a flavor of Silver Strike. As I mentioned, drilling is not our focus this year, but nonetheless, we still love this project for its geological prospectivity. It's our biggest land package by far, 45 square kilometers. And Rio Tinto actually drilled 20 holes into Silver Strike in the mid-90s looking for big copper deposits. And so we came in as the first modern company to drill this project since. And we focused initially in and around the Silver Strike central area, which is in the bottom right portion of the screen. And on our next slide, shows you a nice geological cross-section of a couple of the holes that we drilled. So hole 1, we drilled going to out of the left of the page, 200 meters at roughly 1 gram per ton gold. And we thought, gee, that's interesting. So hole 2, we scissored it and also we hit 220 meters at roughly 1 gram per ton gold, including a nice high-grade subinterval of 86 meters at 2.2 grams per ton gold. And if we zoom in further on that 86 meters of 2.2 grams, we get, call it 5 meters at 9 grams per ton gold against this contact with the rhyolite unit, which is unmineralized. And so we're encouraged by the fact that this contact between the volcaniclastic unit and the rhyolite unit offer a very interesting target for us to step out laterally, as well as at towards surface and at depth to look for additional extensions of this high-grade gold mineralization. So that certainly would be one of the main targets that we'd be looking to tap into when we do get back in and resume drilling at Silver Strike. So if we step back and say we've made these 3 discoveries across our portfolio in just 5 short years, they really show our ability to grow shareholder value through 1, carefully identifying the right projects, number 2, acquiring them intelligently, number 3, studying them extensively, and number 4, executing on very well planned drill programs. We've had a very good competitive cost of drilling, and we ran some numbers at our Carangas project, and our all-in cost to drill a meter is $220 US, so very competitive. And last but not least, we do have a project generation team that's been working hard this year trying to find new projects. Again, we still believe that Bolivia is a vastly underexplored jurisdiction, and we certainly have a first mover advantage operating in the area. And then just tying in some capitalization key points. So we got about 170 million shares outstanding. Our market cap's roughly $330 million US, and we sit with about $28 million US on our balance sheet. We recently completed a raise in September, $35 million Canadian, and so we're fairly well endowed from a cash perspective in this market. And looking at our shareholder list, we're blessed with some very strong and sophisticated industry players. So Silver Corp Metals owns 27% of us. And then our second largest shareholder, Pan American Silver, they own just under 12% of us. And both Silver Corp and Pan American Silver were there pre-discovery. They saw the vision for the silver sand exploration concept and been there through and throughout. And Pan American Silver also, I'll just flag, they've been operating in Bolivia for about 20 years at their San Vicente operation, so know the country very well. And then management and board collectively own just over 7% of the company. And we are also formally covered by 5 different institutions. It's people. We've talked a lot about assets, but I mean, the people really do make a business. So myself, I joined the company in January of this year as president. I was promoted to CEO in September. Previous to New Pacific Metals, I spent 11 years on the buy side. I was a portfolio manager focusing exclusively on precious metals companies. I joined New Pacific as part of its broader evolution from being a successful exploration company into a project development company. Caroline Ordoñez, who's on the call, our VP Corporate Affairs, also just flagged for you Dustin Van Doorselaer, who joined our company in April this year, again, part of our broader effort to bring on folks with project development experience. Dustin, very senior person in our industry. He's a Canadian by background, but has spent the last 15 years of his career in Latin America. He was previously with Calibre Mining in Nicaragua as their VP Ops, and he was with First Majestic as their COO in Mexico before that, and then he's worked with Nearstar. I mean, he's built, operated, shut down mines in Latin America. We're very pleased to have him join our growing company. And then lastly, our board of directors, which I will flag to you in 30 minutes. We've actually got our annual general meeting, and there will be a couple of movements in and around our directors. So I'll just flag the permanent directors that are on here. So Dixon Hall joined our board a couple years ago. He's going to be assuming the role of chairman as proposed in the vote for our AGM, replacing Terry Salmon as chairman, who will be stepping down. And then in addition to that, I'll also flag for you our CEO and founder, as was press released in September. Rui is not standing for re-election. He's been replaced by Paul Simpson, who's a very long-standing, seasoned securities lawyer, steeped in mining industry experience, who's the current lead independent director of Silver Corp. And I'll flag as well Martin Waforn, who's the Senior VP of Tech Services at Pan American Silver, a huge asset for us, one of the top technical silver mines in the industry. And last but not least, I'll flag Dr. Peter McGaw, who's a renowned silver geologist who's won the prestigious Thayer Lindsley Award for his discovery of big silver deposits. So, we do feel like we're right-sizing ourselves. I should add, we got adding one more director, Miles Gow, who's a very seasoned boots on the ground mine operator. He's operated big mines globally over a very distinguished career, and so we feel like we're staffing ourselves up with the necessary expertise again to successfully transition ourselves from being an exploration company into a project development company. And we feel like we're very well towards the finish line there. I think that's it for the formal presentation. I want to thank everyone on the line for their attention. And with that, we can open it up to questions, Timothy.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew, for the very informative presentation. As Andrew said, we'll now start the Q&A portion of the webinar. A reminder to everyone on the line, you can type your questions into the chat box at any time. We already do have a few questions. Maybe I'll step back and ask one here. We have a few questions on the political side of things. So obviously we have experience in Bolivia. Can you give us your assessment of the current political climate in the country?
Yeah, great question. So I think Bolivia. So the current president, Luis Arce, is he's the head of the MAS party, which has been in power since 2005, but under a different president. Before that, it was run by Evo Morales, who is very much a left-leaning president. And so within the MAS party itself, the next presidential election is coming up in October of 2025, so just under 2 years from now. And so both Luis Arce and Evo Morales are competing for leadership of the MAS party, much like we see in the United States, where Trump and Ron DeSantis are in a battle for who will lead the party going forward. So that's very much a topic of interest in Bolivia, and that's something that our point of view is that assuming that if the MAS party were to win the next election, which is not a given. I mean, it's a open election. Bolivia has a very good track record of free and democratic elections. But whether it's Arce or Evo Morales that takes over as MAS, I think we've shown an ability to work with either. I think when Evo Morales, when we came to the country in 2017 and had the success that we have, he was the existing president. He's very pragmatic, but same can be said about Luis Arce, who was the finance minister under that. He's a very technocratic type person, and so I think yes, like any country, there's ebbs and flows politically, but I think the playbook that companies that have successfully operated in this country is that if you can bring to the table world-class technologies, operate to the highest environmental standards, of high standards of community benefit and worker safety. I mean, that's the playbook in Bolivia, and you somewhat insulate yourselves from a lot of the ebbs and flows of the political cycle, and importantly, have a profitable operation that meaningfully contributes to the country in terms of taxes and royalties. I mean, that's the playbook, and that's what we're sticking to. And as long as we stick to that strategy, we decouple ourselves somewhat from the ebbs and flows of what's going on politically. But yeah, very interesting politically, as is the case in every country in the world today. But I mean, that's kind of where things stand.
Great, thank you. And then looking, kind of zooming in a bit, what about local community relations? Do you have local communities by your projects? Are there any negotiations or I guess, what are your efforts also on the community relations front?
Yeah, I mean, great question. So, I mean, this is something that we've been working on since day one when we arrived in the country. And we know our communities really well. We've in this year alone, again, as we've been transitioning from a exploration company into a project development company, we've added some really good CSR focused people onto the team. I mean, it's just amazing the talent that exists in Bolivia from some of the major operations that have been going on there for the last 20 years. And so we're certainly continuing on that front and ramping it up as we get closer and closer towards having a project that's shovel ready. And so it's just an ongoing effort of outreach, engagement, building trust. We do a really good job systematically of going through community by community, introducing ourselves, the team, explaining the project, and really building strong relationships. That's really the key of it, and it's a process, right? It's like any relationship with anyone you know. It's the same thing with communities. That's a collection of individuals, and so we're continuing to push forward on that front, and we think that we've got the team and we're on the right path forward to to earn that social license that is so critical towards building and operating a mine in today's environment.
Great. And we do have one question here that's kind of specific, a specific topic related to that. There's been some recent news in Bolivia regarding illegal miners and maybe environmental damage related to that. Are there any illegal miners or any of those issues at Silver Sands or your other properties?
Yeah, I mean, like Bolivia it's a mining country. There's mining that goes on everywhere, and if you just go take a drive through the area, I mean, it's just part of the culture in Bolivia, and I think that's a really good point. That it is in the news a lot lately. That the environmental effects of illegal mining are they're awful, and these miners don't operate under any sort of regulation, and I think that's been receiving a lot of attention in the news recently. And you kind of go, well, why is that the case? I mean, if this has been always the case that illegal mining is harmful to the environment, why now? And I think the other point that's really salient is they aren't subject to the same tax and royalty obligations as large-scale companies that operate within the confines of the law. And I think that's something that's important to the Bolivian state to ensure that they get the necessary tax and royalties that's due to them from mining of the country's resources, which do belong to the Bolivian people after all. And so I think that's something, a key point to highlight is the why it's in the news more recently is because there's a growing recognition of the loss of state revenue and state income that comes from sort of unconstrained illegal mining activity. So and this issue isn't something that's unique to Bolivia either. I mean, it's all throughout the world really. I mean, sure we're in Canada or the U.S. It's not really something that's a major source of employment, but in lots of countries in Latin America, countries in Africa in particular, it is a really serious issue, and it's one that we as a company are not immune from either. But it's just something that's part of the course of taking a discovery like this and taking it through the process. So it's I think I hope that gives you a flavor of the environment that we're operating within.
Andrew, if you don't mind, I'm just going to add to that because that's a very important question. And that's what exactly Bolivia needs big scale mining, right? The last big mining operations that we have there was the Sumitomos and Pan Americans. They've been in production for the country for the last 15, 17 years. And so that's why they need new mining companies getting into production, because they know that these companies come with all the standards, regulations, and so forth, and then they will absorb this illegal mining, but it also leaves a lot of know-how in the country as well, protecting the environment and everything that, foreign investment brings to the country. So again, this is why it's important to, and it's also recognized by the government itself that they need to create that partnership with the foreign companies to come and bring know-how and investment.
Thanks, Carolina. Always nice to have a Bolivian on the call.
Yes, absolutely. Continuing on a similar vein here, what is the permitting process for exploration and eventually mine construction? And maybe particularly could address the environmental impact assessment process.
Sure. Yeah, no, great question. So similar to Canada, the first step is you kick off by filing a project description that kind of lodges it in the system. So in Bolivia, that's called a project categorization form. So we filed earlier this year and received our categorization in May of this year that categorized our project as a Category 1 project, a major mining operation. So we sort of officially kicked that process off, and then really the next step is actually submitting the environmental impact assessment study, which requires data, which we've got probably 90% of the necessary data. We still need to go back in for one more wet season to collect biological flora fauna water samples. The wet season is just about to kick off, sort of January to March. So we're going to get in and collect that additional data. And then we need one more dry season sample after that, which will be, call it April, May. And then we'll have the necessary data that we need to submit our environmental impact assessment study. There is also, before that submission, that's on the environmental side. On the social side, we host what's called a public consultation session, which is where the communities are invited to one last opportunity to hear the project, chat, but ultimately we're working well ahead of that with our communities to make sure that all our issues have been addressed beforehand. And then once we've got the baseline data, we've done this public consultation, those come together for the submission. And then that goes to the Ministry of Environment and Water. And then from there, our consultants in the country have given us a timeline of about 3 to 6 months after that submission for it to work through the system and ultimately get our approval. And I will flag that I get this question a lot, like, hey, when was the last time someone permitted a big open pit mine in Bolivia? And it's a great question. It's been 15, 20 years. It's been done before. I think the playbook's there, but there's a certain element of it where we are pioneering to a certain extent, and that's where us as a management team are adding the value is successfully negotiating this landscape. But on the other hand, whilst no large scale mines have been permitted in 15, 20 years, there's been several small scale projects that have been. And so at least we know that the machinery and the mechanisms within the country do function well. And so we're going to continue to, with our great team that we've assembled this year in the country, push it forward. But that's, hopefully that gives you a sense of what the path looks like towards our environmental permit.
Great. Well, shifting directions a little bit here. Obviously, Silver Corp's a substantial investor in the company, and Pan American has also come in as an investor. What role will they play? Are they actively involved, or are they just passive investors at this time?
Yeah, I mean, great question. So, yeah, I'm definitely not actively involved. I mean, as you see with our board, we've got Paul Simpson, who's a Silver Corp director, is hopping on the board, and Pan American Silver. They've got Martin Wilforn, their technical VP, is on our board as well. So we do have board representation from both companies, but our management team is independent New Pacific. So it's a point to flag. They've both been there, as I mentioned, from day one, pre-discovery at Silver Sand. So they know the project, the environment really well. But I will flag that in our recent financing, so we raised $25 million US, 10 million of that came from Pan American. I mean, in our recent financing, they went well beyond their pro rata, and Silver Corp also, they put in another 5 million US. So both companies continue to be very active supporters of what we're doing, and I think they both understand the strategic value, in particular, of a project like Silver Sand that can produce, as I mentioned earlier, that scale silver production in a world that desperately needs new sources of silver production.
Great. A different question here, but can you give us an approximate breakdown of your focus and maybe even of the budgets for the 3 projects in 2024?
Yeah, great question. So Silver Sand will be our biggest portion of the budget. Just on the studies alone, pre-feasibility study, likely, pending a successful outcome, which we certainly expect. If we go into full feasibility study, that'll be on top of that. Probably, and we need to do a couple of geotech holes later in the year. Environmental impact assessment study, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 5-6 million, something like that. It could be just a ballpark guess. Karangas will be much less than that. Like for us, we really are focused on getting that PEA study done and really understanding what the economics of Carangas look like. And we're also collecting additional metallurgical data this year. I think it's about a Canadian $400,000 exercise. You got the PA on top of that. So probably, the low single digit millions would be my guess at Carangas. And then for Silver Strike, again, unless there's a material change in the environment, we don't have any current plans to be spending there. So just percentage wise, I'd probably be something in the neighborhood of 3/4, 80% of our project focused spend will be on silver sand, with the balance of that being really from our Carangas project.
Great. And one related question here, ever popular question. Obviously, you did just recently close a substantial financing, but how much cash does the company have, and how long will that last with your ongoing plans?
Yeah, I mean, so it was $28 million US, and it's a tough question to answer because it depends on what we do. And part of that, as we flagged in our use of proceeds, was that some of that money we earmarked as sort of early construction activities at Silver Sand, which is going to be contingent on the speed of success with which we receive our environmental permit. And so if we get that, there's some very long lead items involved in the Silver Sand construction budget, like the power line, the water dam, etc. And part of the reason why we raise what we raise is to have that sufficient capital on hand in the event that we are successful faster than we think, so we can spend it. So it's hard to say that we didn't raise what we raised to just kind of take our current spend rate and take the cash divided by current spend rate, because at that we could last for like 3-4 years, but that's kind of not what we're gearing ourselves up for. I think so it's a tricky question to answer, just again because it's contingent success based. Same thing goes with Carangas, right? Do we want to get back in and start aggressively drilling some of those anomalies in the area? Again, that's a function of where the market stands. But I think safe to say that what we do have for us is the cash necessary for us to just not worry about finances and do what we got to do to successfully execute on our growth plans. I think that's the important point for us. We've got enough cash to be able to successfully execute on our growth plans.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. Maybe one question I'll ask just to cap off. You mentioned the upcoming plans, but just to review, what are some key catalysts or news items we might expect to have over the coming months?
I think, for us, it's the ongoing efforts towards bringing our Silver Sand project closer to being shovel ready. So first half of next year, our pre-feasibility study, call it Q2 of next year as well in parallel. And hopefully we'll have some news to report on the status of our permit application. And then going back to our work plan, so surrounding our Silver Sand claims that we own 100% of, there's it's owned by a state-owned mining company, Commie Ball, and we signed an agreement with Commie Ball. We need to get that agreement ratified by Parliament, and we're working very hard behind the scenes towards that. We would hope to have some good news to report on that front in the new year. And then at Carangas, it's really this PEA study is our most important next step. So we're again quietly working behind the scenes furiously with our consultants. That's a process that's well underway. We expect to release the results of that again Q2 of next year, as well as we'd have some additional metallurgical data to come in a few months' time that we're collecting at Carangas. So I think those are probably the most important milestones for us as a company. And then behind that is just what goes on in the broader silver market. At the end of the day, like a lot of these juniors, that's probably the most meaningful driver of where things go in the markets and our shares. So we do think that there's a very constructive backdrop for precious metals and silver in particular that we expect to participate in.
Right. Well, I'd like to thank Andrew and Carolina for presenting today, and thank you everyone on the line for tuning in. Just a reminder that Red Cloud will be back next Monday as our webinar series continues with Brought Ahead Lithium presenting Monday, December 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Tim. And again, thanks to everyone on the line. Great questions. Really enjoyed the session.